Tonight, we begin at the crumbling edge of a rain-slicked rooftop, somewhere deep in the wooded heart of 17th century Japan. Below, nestled in a misty valley, lies a monastery. Its tiles are cracked, its lanterns dimmed. The bell that once called pilgrims from miles around now hangs crooked like a forgotten promise. Moss climbs over stone Buddhas, and the garden once raked daily into ripples of discipline lies abandoned, scattered with fallen pine needles and rotting fruit. Inside, the air is cooler than you expect. You step across creaking tatami mats, the scent of cedar and dust thick in your nose. The monks here used to chant in the mornings, their voices echoing like prayer-shaped wind. Now, mostly silence and worry. You're just in time because this isn't just any temple, it's a sacred place hanging by a thread. The donations have dried up. Patronage from the local daimyo is gone, rerouted to newer, flashier shrines. War has shifted borders, and with it, the flow of silver. The rice harvest was weak, pilgrims few and far between. Rumor has it the abbots begun selling calligraphy scrolls at the market like a common artisan. You probably won't survive this as a religious institution. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is somewhere around 1675. You peer around the corner into a small windowless room where 5 senior monks are seated cross-legged in a circle, each clutching a tea bowl, not in ceremony, but out of habit. They aren't sipping with reverence. They're stressed. The bowls are mostly empty. The oldest monk sighs, rubbing his neck. "We may have to close," he mutters. "If we can't pay the grain debt by winter, the magistrate will take the land." One of them nods slowly. Another just stares at the floor. And then there's one, he's younger maybe, just recently ordained, maybe a little too bold. He clears his throat.
"What if we didn't close?" he says. "What if we planted something?"
The others blink at him like he's proposed selling temple statues on the roadside. "Tea," he adds. "We have the hillside. The soil is good. The old terraces are still there from the monks who farmed rice before the fire." One elder coughs so hard it almost counts as laughter. "Tea is not salvation," another says. "It is not sacred." Neither the young monk replies is starvation. There's a beat of silence, long and awkward. You feel it in your bones the same way you might feel a pause in a breakup or a marriage proposal, because everything's about to shift. It's not like monasteries haven't turned to odd solutions before. In the Heian period, temples forged coins. During the Kamakura Wars, some even stockpiled arrows and lent horses. Desperate times, creative monks. But this idea, growing tea to sell, that was crass, earthy, commercial. You can't chant while farming, or so they thought. Still, desperate men in cold monasteries will sometimes say yes when they mean no, so they agree grudgingly to let the younger monk try. They give him a patch of land at the far edge of the compound past the stone bridge and the moss-covered Torii gate. It's overgrown with weeds, haunted by centipedes, and shrouded in fog most mornings. It is by temple standards the compost heap of real estate. He bows, thanks them, and immediately begins digging. There's a historical record, just one of this moment. A faded temple log ink, barely legible, noting Brother Kisho has begun a tea experiment. Pray it fails quickly. Charming. You step out into that field, feel the crunch of frost on your sandals. Kisho is there, sleeves rolled, clearing the earth with a crude hoe. His breath fogs in the morning air. He hums a sutra to himself, not for holiness, but for rhythm. Tea doesn't grow overnight. It needs the right altitude, the right humidity, pruning, shading, and above all, patience. But monks are good at patience. That part at least they've got covered. And so it begins a monastery once on the verge of collapse, now banking its future on a bitter green leaf. You return to that fog-wrapped hillside just one season later. The earth is still uneven, still laced with stubborn roots and clusters of weed. But there, rising in tight rows, are the first tea shoots. Small, frail, almost defiant. They glint in the morning dew like tiny jade swords. Brother Kisho stands at the edge of the field, hands tucked into his sleeves, rocking slightly on his heels, as if trying not to hope too hard. It's been a difficult winter. The monastery's roof leaked during the last storm. One of the senior monks slipped on an icy step, and now walks with a cane carved from ginkgo wood. Rice stores are low. Pilgrims still haven't returned, but tea is happening. Keisho tends to his plants like he's caring for tiny monks. He waters them, shades them, speaks to them in low tones. He even writes small sutras on parchment and tucks them between the rows, just in case enlightenment helps with root development. Superstition? Maybe. But the plants seem to thrive. Still not everyone is convinced. One elder passes by and mutters, "At least he's not chanting about profit in the zendo." Another worries about the optics. What if the local daimyo sees monks working the land like farmers? Keisho doesn't respond. He just keeps trimming and shading. Now, tea in Japan wasn't just any crop. By the 17th century, it had evolved far beyond its Chinese medicinal roots. In noble courts and samurai estates, tea had become ritual art philosophy. The chanoyu, or tea ceremony, was a dance of stillness, an aesthetic of impermanence and simplicity. A single bowl, a single gesture perfected. But the tea grown by monks like Keisho wasn't for display. It wasn't powdered matcha served in lacquered bowls. It was leaf tea rolled roasted humble, the kind that farmers drank at the end of a long day, the kind that merchants sold wrapped in straw and tied with faded cords. Historians still argue whether monasteries like Keisho's broke tradition or simply bent it. Some claim it was a form of agricultural revival. Others suggest it was survival cloaked in Zen humility. One scroll from a nearby temple records, "We cultivate stillness, and when necessary, the soil." That spring something shifts. A traveling merchant from Kyoto passing through on his way to Nagasaki hears of the monk who grows tea. Out of curiosity, or maybe because he's short on caffeine, he visits. Keisho, half covered in dirt, greets him with a bow and offers a bowl. The merchant sips, blinks, then asks to buy a bundle. He races to the elders with the news, clutching the merchant's coins, small tarnished, but real. "We've sold tea," he says, breathless. One elder frowns, to whom another raises an eyebrow. Did he pay enough to rethatch the guest hall? Keisho shrugs. No, but it's a start. And it is. Soon the merchant returns with friends. One owns a stall in the Kyoto market. Another supplies temples with incense and cloth. They bring news a drought in Uji has affected the tea harvest there. Demand is rising. Even rough leaf tea has value. So Keisho expands. He recruits novices to help boys who joined the monastery to escape conscription or poverty. They trade prayer beads for baskets. Their chants become humming work songs. They still meditate at dawn, but by noon they're hauling compost and checking soil pH, though they wouldn't call it that. They just say, "Does it feel right?" And the field grows. By autumn, the monastery produces enough tea to barter with neighboring villages for rice and salt. A local potter even begins etching the temple's crest onto ceramic jars, brown clay, with simple brush strokes. It's not branding, it's identity. Of course, not everything goes smoothly. A storm flattens part of the terrace. Mice chew through twine bundles. Once a magistrate's clerk accuses the monks of unlicensed trade. But Keisho, in his saffron robes and muddy sandals, bows and offers the man a bowl of their best roast. The clerk leaves with a gift jar and never returns. And so slowly, reverently, a monastery once sinking into debt begins to float again on green leaves and quiet determination. One quirky tidbit from the temple records: in the second year of the tea venture, a senior monk accidentally brewed the leaves with river water drawn too close to the carp pond. The resulting fish tea was so revolting it became legend. Brew only upstream, the records warn or risk enlightenment of a very different kind. Back in the garden, Keisho watches the sun rise over the misty valley. He holds a cup of his own, blend sips and smiles. Not because he's saved the temple yet, but because for the first time in months, it tastes like possibility. It starts with a rumor, as most things do. A visiting monk from a temple 2 provinces away arrives for a retreat. He wears layered robes that smell faintly of camphor and saddle dust, and his eyebrows arch like mountains when he hears about the tea. Monks growing leaves. For sale, he mutters, then sips a bowl anyway and asks for seconds. The next morning he's wandering the terrace with Keisho peppering him with questions, soil-type roasting method, which brush he uses to seal the jars. Keisho explains patiently, though, there's still that flutter of guilt in his chest. This isn't just Dharma, it's business, and that gets complicated fast. When the visitor returns home, he brings a pouch of tea as a gift for his abbot. 2 weeks later, a letter arrives. It reads, "If enlightenment tastes like this, we must talk." That's how the letters begin. Then the requests. One temple writes asking to purchase 2 bundles a month. Another wants seeds. Another more boldly asks Keisho to visit and teach them the cultivation method. He reads that one twice, hands trembling slightly over the parchment. Not bad for a monk who once failed at carpentry duty. You're seated now with the elder council. The ink on the letters is still drying, and the tea jars rattle gently in the corner from the breeze sneaking through the cracked shoji. One elder clears his throat. "So we are missionaries of tea now." Keisho nods once, perhaps just stewards. A quiet debate unfolds, not heated, but with the weight of tradition pressing like stones on a raft. "Is this right?" someone whispers. "Is this pure?" Another elder, older than the temple bells, chuckles softly. "If a bowl of tea keeps the doors open and the roof whole, I'll bless every leaf." So it begins. Keisho, once a boy too quiet for sermons, becomes a teacher. He travels light, just robes, sandals, and a wrapped pouch of dried leaves. He visits mountain monasteries and riverside hermitages, teaching monks how to till shade and steam. He shows them how to feel the right moment for roasting by smell alone, not by any clock. When it smells like roasted chestnut, he says, but before it smells like sorrow. It becomes a saying. And though he never charges a single coin for his knowledge, many temples repay him in other ways. Spare timber, thatching material, old texts no longer copied. These things arrive in creaking carts or carried on the backs of novices. It's never called payment, it's gratitude. Meanwhile at home the field doubles, then triples. The novices no longer just help, they take pride in it. They argue over the best harvest time chase, stray goats out of the rows, even write poems about tea steam in the mist. The bell still rings at dawn, and incense still curls through the hallways, but the scent of roasted leaves has joined it, humble, warm anchoring. Here's your quirky tidbit. One night, a fox gets into the storehouse. The monks chase it out, but not before it steals a small jar of the highest grade tea. Weeks later, villagers swear they saw a fox sitting upright on a rock near the temple gate, holding the jar between its paws like a cup. Keisho never confirms it, but he leaves a fresh bundle near the rock every new moon, just in case. Now let's address the scholarly murmurings. Historians still argue whether this wave of monastic tea cultivation truly began with Keisho's temple, or if it was just part of a larger trend across rural Japan. Some temple records suggest other abbeys experimented with herbal infusions or minor farming long before. Others insist Keisho's letters became the blueprint. The truth, probably both. But one thing is clear, something changed. The idea of monks as passive recipients of alms began to shift. They were no longer just seekers of enlightenment, they were stewards of the land. Not farmers, but something gentler. Observers of growth, of time, of patience. And through it all, Keisho remains quiet. He still meditates before sunrise, still tends the altar candles with reverence. But now his prayer beads are stained with soil. His fingernails never quite lose the tint of green. The other monks joke that he's more leaf than man now, and yet beneath the teasing there's pride. The temple roof has been patched, the kitchen has miso again. A young novice was recently able to send rice to his parents back in the village. When asked how, he just smiled and said, "With tea. It's not wealth, it's not extravagance, but it's enough." And one morning, as Keisho steps into the garden, the steam from his bowl catching the first sunbeam of the day, he hears something unexpected: laughter. Not chanting, not recitation, just laughter echoing between the tiled halls. Joy unforced and spontaneous. He sips his tea and smiles. It's working. You rise before the bell. The stones beneath your feet are cool, and the dew clings to the hems of your robe like forgotten dreams. The sun hasn't breached the horizon yet, but the garden breathes. A hush before the day. The tea plants stand in tidy rows, glistening as though they've been polished by moonlight. Keisho is already there, crouched low, whispering something to a leaf like it's a childhood friend. You wonder if he ever really sleeps. Today is the first harvest of the season. The monks move silently, reverently, with woven baskets strapped to their backs and wide-brimmed straw hats shading their expressions. This is no casual picking, this is ritual. Fingertips graze each leaf with care, seeking the youngest, most delicate shoots. They say those carry the morning in their veins. Because halfway through the harvest, a horse arrives. It's a dusty creature, flanks damp with sweat, its rider in imperial courier blue, bearing a scroll sealed in red wax. No one speaks. Not until Keisho gently straightens bows slightly to the rider and accepts the message. He reads it twice, then a third time. His jaw tightens. You're still standing among the plants when he walks over, scroll in hand. The governor has heard about our tea.
Uh-oh.
Apparently someone no one knows who sent a pouch of temple tea to a provincial official. That official liked it so much he shared it with a merchant, who then sent it to a minor lord, who then gifted it to the governor's table during a New Year's banquet. Fast forward, and now the governor wants 100 jars a year. You watch Keisho reread the scroll. Tribute, he mutters. It tastes just like gratitude, but costs twice as much. Here's your mainstream historical fact in feudal Japan. Temples were often required to provide goods or services to regional lords. It could be rice prayer offerings, or in rare cases, luxury items. Tribute wasn't always forceful, but it was never optional. The council meets that night under lamplight, each elder rubbing worry from their foreheads. We're monks, not merchants, one protests. Another adds, and if we don't comply? Keisho is quiet for a long moment. Then we comply, but we do it on our terms. And just like that, the temple becomes a supplier to the governor's estate. But this isn't selling out, it's strategy. Keisho proposes something bold. Instead of simply filling jars and sending them off, the temple will design its own labels, elegant brushwork, stamped with a seal that reads, "Brewed in stillness." They will deliver the tea with handwritten verses, with each bundle a blessing. If we must serve, Keisho says, let it be art. The monks grumble at first. Some miss the days when the biggest crisis was a cracked incense burner. But slowly even they begin to see the purpose. Not profit, but pride. Craft. Discipline disguised as labor. One monk who's terrible at calligraphy begins practicing every night just to help with the labels. Another starts writing haiku to accompany each jar. One of them simply reads, "Boil water softly. Let leaf and silence unfurl. Truth is in the steam." Now here's your quirky tidbit. One jar delivered accidentally to a local playwright instead of a merchant ends up featured in a stage performance. The character holds it like a holy relic and declares, "This tea reveals your sins." The audience erupts in laughter, and the temple suddenly finds itself the subject of both reverence and parody. Still, scholars to this day debate what this era of monk-led tea production meant. Some argue it blurred the line between sacred and secular. Others claim it was a new form of monastic relevance, proof that spiritual life could adapt and even thrive within an economic framework. Historians still argue whether it was compromise or quiet revolution. But back to the harvest. You watch the monks now, not just as gatherers, but as artisans. Each stage, from steaming to drying to roasting, is done with the precision of a prayer. The storehouse smells like roasted rice and distant thunder. Kisho walks through, inspecting each jar with a glance, his hands never idle. At night, you sit on the engawa, the temple's wooden veranda, watching moonlight spill over the garden. Kisho sits beside you. He doesn't speak, just sips from a warm bowl. You follow his gaze. The novices have built a small shrine in the corner of the field. Nothing grand, just stones, stacked carefully, with a single camellia blossom tucked between them. They call it the tea spirit's altar. Kisho chuckles. They think the field has a soul. Does it, you ask? He doesn't answer, just sips again. The wind rises, the bell chimes once in the distance. You realize it doesn't matter. Belief has already taken root in the soil, in the steam, in the hands of those who pick and pour. And whether or not the governor ever tastes the difference, this isn't just about saving a temple anymore. It's about planting something that might outlast it. The governor's men arrive in spring. Not the terrifying tax collectors with swords you half expected, but rather two tired attendants in lacquered sandals, a dusty ox cart and polite bowing that feels rehearsed. They hand over a signed receipt scroll, collect the stacked jars of temple tea with all the reverence of gathering sacred relics, and shuffle off as quickly as they came. No inspection, no ceremony, no complaints. Kisho watches them disappear down the hill and says, well, that was anticlimactic. The thing is, this becomes routine. Season by season, harvest by harvest, the temple tea gains quiet renown. At first, it's whispered about in markets. Oh, this one's from the monks up on Koyasan. Then, without warning, it shows up in an imperial kitchen. Then, at a scholars' conference in Kyoto. Suddenly, it's fashionable. You now live in a monastery that's somehow part spiritual retreat, part boutique beverage empire. Of course, monks being monks, nobody really wants to admit that. So they turn everything into ritual. Sorting leaves becomes a form of mindfulness training. Packaging jars turns into an exercise in humility. Kisho implements a rotating system. No monk does the same job twice in a row. We make tea to quiet the ego, he says, which is why you'll spend next week scrubbing the boiling pots. Here's your historical fact in 14th century Japan. Zen monasteries often embrace structured labor samu as an essential path to enlightenment. Tasks like sweeping, weeding, or cooking weren't seen as distractions from the sacred, but as sacred in themselves. Chop wood, carry water wasn't just a proverb, it was doctrine. Of course, that didn't mean everyone loved it. One novice, after 3 straight days, sorting twigs from finished leaves, asks if maybe this particular discipline could be outsourced to squirrels. He's rewarded with 3 more days and a quiet lecture on impermanence. The tea, however, keeps improving. Thanks to a traveling herbalist who trades seeds for shelter, the monks begin experimenting with soil mixtures, leaf blending, even temperature adjustments. They start to understand how altitude affects bitterness, how moonlight-picked leaves taste sweeter in the bowl. No one says it out loud, but you're pretty sure someone charted a taste map based on planetary alignments. And here's your fringe tidbit. A monk named Soben insists that reciting sutras over drying leaves infuses the tea with calm. Others roll their eyes until someone sends a jar to a warrior lord who claims it cured his insomnia. Soon, Soben is in charge of the drying room, chanting softly to trays of leaves like a lullaby. One day, Kisho finds you watching the leaves rotate in the sun. He says nothing for a while, then adds, "The tea changed us more than we changed it."
And he's right.
Because now the temple isn't just surviving, it's flourishing. Donations, once scarce, begin trickling in from unlikely places. A scholar sends a rare scroll. A merchant family donates a cedar altar table. Even the village down the mountain, once suspicious of the silent robed men on the hill, begins sending rice in exchange for blessing tea. Still, not everything is smooth leaves and sunlight. Some monks worry that the temple's identity is shifting too much. One elder warns, "We were supposed to renounce the world, not run a supply chain." Another compares it to polishing a begging bowl until it becomes a mirror. It's Kisho who keeps balance. At morning assemblies, he reminds the brothers, "We make tea not to prosper, but to practice. If it sustains the temple, then it is part of the path. If it distracts us, we must prune it like any overgrown branch.
And yet the world keeps calling.
One summer, an imperial inspector arrives, young, sharp-eyed, and clearly out of place among the bamboo and birdsong. He examines the jars, the drying racks, the chanting monk. He tastes a sip, closes his eyes, and then does something no one expects. He smiles. This, he says softly, is peace in a bowl. He writes a report so glowing it may as well be a love letter. Within months, Keisho receives a formal invitation to present a jar of temple tea at a Kyoto festival for cultural preservation. It's only symbolic, the letter says, but so is a temple bell. Keisho is torn. He wants to refuse, but you can see it in his eyes. He's curious. Let the tea go, he finally decides. We stay. And so the jar travels escorted by 2 monks and a box carved from sandalwood. It sits on a velvet pedestal surrounded by brocade and ceremonial fans. Crowds gather, scholars nod, a poet writes an ode, someone steals the empty jar afterward. The temple laughs for a week. That night, back under the stars, Keisho sits cross-legged by the fire pit. The monks gather silently, bowls in hand. No ceremony, no chanting, just tea. Steam curls into the darkness like a slow exhale. You sip and the flavor is gentle, slightly grassy, a hint of smoke.
But then mostly it tastes like belonging.
And for the first time in years, you believe not just in the temple's survival, but in its reason for being. You believe the tea saved it.
And you helped make it happen.
The mountain wakes before the sun. You're up with it reluctantly because Keisho has decided that sunrise is the ideal time for leaf sorting and enlightenment, he says with a suspicious twinkle, doesn't like to sleep in. The sorting platform is slick with dew. Your breath curls in the cold air as you kneel beside baskets of last night's harvest. Nearby, a few other monks move silently, hands, nimble eyes, calm. There's a rhythm to it, pluck, examine, flick, almost meditative, until you accidentally sneeze into a pile and earn the day's quota of sarcastic bows. Welcome to tea monk life, but something feels different today. There's a ripple in the routine. Whispers floating down from the upper chambers. Keisho summoned to the inner sanctum. The chanting falters just briefly. Then news. The provincial tax assessor is coming, not the polite collector with lacquer sandals from before. This one is serious, stern, known for shutting down non-essential religious operations. A bureaucrat with a reputation for enforcing quotas and quoting rules nobody remembers writing. You glance around, the peaceful gardens, the bamboo racks, the monks laying leaves in quiet reverence. And suddenly all of it feels fragile. We may not pass inspection, one monk mutters. We're not a temple anymore, we're a farm with prayers.
That hits hard.
Keisho calls a meeting in the prayer hall. No incense, no gongs, just floor mats, bowed heads, and anxious eyes. This temple, he says quietly, was saved by tea, but it is still a temple. We did not abandon our vows, we embodied them. He proposes a radical idea: open the doors. When the assessor arrives, don't hide anything. Let him see everything, how the monks chant while drying leaves, how rituals infuse every task, how the tea isn't profit but practice. If our way is true, Keisho says, then we have nothing to fear. Most monks nod. One groans, we're doomed. And here's your historical fact. During the Muromachi period in Japan, 1336-1573, Buddhist temples often struggled to prove their social and spiritual worth to governing authorities. Many adapted by aligning their practices with broader cultural and economic needs, offering education, healing, or in this case tea. Still you can't help but feel like you're preparing for Judgment Day. The temple is scrubbed, scrolls are dusted, the tea jars are arranged like relics of divine origin. You're assigned to serve the inspector a ceremonial bowl. Keisho tells you, make it honest, make it humble. Easy for him to say. You're shaking so hard you nearly spill the matcha. The tax assessor arrives at dawn 2 days later. He's shorter than expected, wrapped in layers of navy silk, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He says little, just walks, observes, notes. At one point he picks up a drying tray, sniffs it, and sneezes spectacularly. You pretend not to laugh. He watches a monk chant over a steaming pot. He questions another about the leaf rotation cycles. He even sits through morning meditation, though he keeps glancing at the incense burner like it owes him money. Finally, he sits, and you bring him tea. The bowl is simple, wood-fired, uneven, the tea inside a pale green mirror. He sips, pauses, sips again. Then he asks, "What's the ritual here?" You panic for a second, then remember Keisho's words. "It's not a ritual," you say softly. "It's a reflection." He raises one eyebrow but says nothing. He spends the night in the guest room, wakes before dawn, and leaves with a single comment. "Tell your abbot the tea is adequate." You'd think he slapped you, but Keisho smiles wide. In government, he says adequate is the highest praise. The next week, a courier arrives with an official scroll. The temple is approved. Its agro-spiritual contributions are noted as culturally significant. It is for the time being untouchable. You celebrate by sleeping through morning chanting. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some records, tax inspectors in medieval Japan were bribed not with money or gold, but with rare blends of tea or specially crafted bowls. One legend claims a particularly grumpy official was permanently mellowed by a batch infused with plum blossoms. He allegedly became a monk. Historians still argue whether temples like yours were genuinely spiritual centers with agricultural byproducts or smartly disguised enterprises designed to escape taxation. Some say they blurred the line. Others insist the tea was always secondary. But for you, this tea has become the path. You don't just sort leaves anymore, you feel them. You don't just serve tea, you embody it. A moving meditation in green and silence. And Keisho, he seems both proud and slightly annoyed. "Now we'll get more attention," he grumbles. Might have to start a wait list for enlightenment. But you know he's glad. 'Cause tea didn't just save the monastery, it made it visible. By now you've learned to walk without disturbing the moss. The stone paths that thread through the temple grounds curve like old kanji twists of intention memory and slipper-worn repetition. You know every dip in the flagstones, every spot where rain pools, every flicker of dragonfly wings above the pond, and every morning the steam of fresh tea curls through the air like a soft mantra. You no longer flinch at the chill of the water basin or forget which sleeve to fold first during the ritual prep. In short, you've become competent, Keisho notices. So he gives you a new task. Not a demotion, not a reward, just a quiet shift. You're now part of the blending team. The ones who decide which leaves become what kind of tea. Matcha, sencha. A mellow roasted hujicha for aging priests. A brisk early spring blend to wake sluggish minds. It's overwhelming at first, not just because of the vocabulary, but the expectations. You don't just taste tea, you read it, smell it, anticipate how it will age, how it pairs with meditation, how the weather on harvesting day shifts its bitterness by half a breath. The master blender, an old monk named Junryu, barely speaks. He communicates in eyebrow tilts, gentle nods, and long contemplative silences that make you question your entire existence. On your first day, he hands you 2 bowls. Which one, he says, remembers rain? You pick the second. He nods. Later, you realize neither had ever seen rain. He was testing your intuition. This section of temple life feels less like farming and more like poetry. You spend hours staring at dried leaves like they hold secrets. You weigh stems with the precision of a jeweler. One day, Junryu lets you prepare a blend unsupervised, and when he sips it, he gives you a half smile that feels like a standing ovation. Here's your historical fact. The art of tea, blending particularly in Japanese monastic settings, became a deeply respected practice by the 14th century. Monks were often the first to experiment with seasonal blends, roast levels, and regional terroir long before tea became a commercial product. Still, not everyone in the monastery embraces your new role. "I see," says one monk, eyeing your apron, stained with sencha dust. "You've joined the leaf whisperers." You shrug. "Better than incense patrol." He nods, considering. "Fair." As your palate deepens, so does your awareness. You begin noticing more than taste. Who drinks which tea? Why? How the novice who chants too fast prefers lighter brews. How the elder who barely speaks savors the smoky bitterness of hojicha as though it mirrors his memories. Junryu begins letting you tweak the monastery's main ceremonial blend. Tiny changes 0.5 gram of dried plum leaf here, a smudge of roasted rice there. Kisho tastes it during the full moon ceremony, pauses and says, "Ah, a tea with secrets." You're not sure if that's a compliment or a warning. Then comes the request. A visiting noble family, loyal donors to the temple, has asked for a private tea ceremony. They want something special, something only your monastery can offer. And for reasons unknown, Kisho nominates you to oversee it. You panic, you protest. Kisho just pats your shoulder and says, "You're less likely to accidentally insult a daimyo than Junryu." The ceremony is held in the oldest tea room, a tiny space barely large enough to stretch your legs. You spend 3 days scrubbing every surface, folding every cloth, testing every step of the service until your hands act before your thoughts do. The guests arrive in silence. Their robes rustle like paper. Their eyes scan the room with polite detachment. You bow, you serve. And when the tea reaches their lips, time seems to pause.
No grand pronouncements, no applause, just a single word from the head of the household, Sabi. Loneliness.
Imperfection. The beauty of things that fade. And here's your quirky tidbit. Japanese tea ceremonies often embrace the aesthetic principle of wabi-sabi, a philosophy rooted in impermanence, humility, and the understated. Teaware was often intentionally cracked, mottled, or asymmetrical to reflect this worldview. Historians still argue whether these aesthetic values were cultivated by tea monks as spiritual metaphors or simply a practical use of flawed pottery. Some say it was both. Others point to Zen's preference for the unfinished, the humble, the imperfect. You meanwhile are exhausted. After the guests leave, you sit on the back steps and drink the last bowl of tea in solitude. It's not perfect. The temperature's a little off, the froth too thin, but it tastes honest.
And that's enough.
Junryu finds you there, sits beside you, says nothing for a while. Then quietly, you've stopped trying to impress the tea. You frown. Was I supposed to? He shrugs. At first, yes, but now you're just listening. He closes his eyes. Good. You glance at the bowl again, steam rising in lazy spirals. The same leaves that saved a temple. The same leaves that held you steady when nothing else made sense.
And you wonder, was it ever just a drink? Or has it always been a conversation?
It starts with a ledger.
An old one, worn around the edges, brittle in the center. The ink's faded to the color of dried blood, and it smells faintly of dust and neglect. Kisho hands it to you one morning without ceremony. Read, he says.
It takes you a moment to understand the numbers. They're handwritten in dense vertical columns filled with terms you've only half learned. But eventually the truth begins to surface. The temple's finances are terrifying. Not current finances, thankfully. This is a historical ledger from a century past. But the panic still bubbles up as you trace the sharp plunge in donations, the rising cost of repairs, the absurd sum spent on ink and scroll paper. The temple back then had teetered on the edge of collapse. And then, like a turning wind, the line items change. Tea sales begin to appear, first small, then larger, then steady. You flip the page hard, tapping like temple drums. In beautiful calligraphy, you see it proceeds from ceremonial grade, matcha, batch 3. Then more bespoke autumn blend ordered by Lord Sato. Midwinter, roasted leaf, commissioned by the Matsuda family. Tea, it turns out, saved the monastery. Not war, not miracles, not a rain of gold from the heavens, just leaves. And suddenly everything feels different. You look at your hands, stained green from yesterday's blend, and realize you're part of something ancient. Not just a ceremony, a survival. Kisho confirms it that night. When the temple's roof caved in, it wasn't prayers that patched it. It was 10 grams of gyokuro sold at a premium. You laugh, he doesn't.
It's no joke, he says. We sold tea not as monks, but as craftsmen, quietly, respectfully. Some called it undignified, but we are still here.
Here's your historical fact. During periods of economic hardship, several Buddhist monasteries in Japan turned to the production and sale of tea to sustain themselves. While this commercial activity raised eyebrows, it also preserved temples that would otherwise have fallen into ruin. The debate was real. Some monks argued that trading in tea distracted from their vows, that becoming merchants even of sacred herbs blurred the lines between devotion and economy. Others countered that survival wasn't greed, that the act of blending, of sharing, of nourishing others through tea could itself be a form of spiritual practice. Historians still argue whether these commercial endeavors diluted religious purpose or preserved it. Some claim it sparked early tea guilds, others think it sowed the seeds for Japan's later tea trade dominance. You think it made the temple human. And that's what you see now as the next chapter opens. Kisho shows you another scroll, a list of temple clients. Not nobles, farmers, basket weavers, blacksmiths. People who scraped together coins to buy tea they believed would calm their minds, cure a cold, bring focus to a chaotic world. You imagine them sitting by lantern light, sipping slowly, letting the bitterness settle something ancient in their bones. Not just a drink, a moment of peace. There's even a letter from a merchant in Kyoto. He thanks the monastery for a blend that made my wife smile through her illness. He says he's sent payment for another pouch, plus a small gift linen to be used as altar cloth. Kisho tucks the letter back into its bamboo case. These people, they didn't just save us with money. They reminded us why we existed. To bring stillness. To offer something warm in a cold season. You ask if the tea business continued. He nods for a while. Then it faded as fortunes rose, donations returned, roofs were repaired, but we never forgot.
And he takes you to a locked room.
Inside wooden chests, labeled blends from centuries past, dried samples kept for memory, molds for pressing tea bricks, even a ceremonial tea scoop carved from sandalwood, etched with the phrase, in each bowl, a vow. You lift the scoop, feel its weight, realize what you're holding isn't just a tool, it's a relic of desperation, ingenuity, grace. Quirky tidbit time in some temples, tea scoops were considered heirlooms passed from blend master to blend master. Some were named. One famous scoop in Uji was called Whispering Leaf. Another in Nara was simply known as the Listener. You wonder what yours would be called. And the next day, you brew a blend inspired by that merchant's letter, light, fragrant, gently, calming. You name it, Smile Through Rain. Kisho nods in approval. Let's package it. You blink. Really? He grins. It's been a while since we paid the bell ringer. Maybe this'll help. And so begins your part in the temple's quiet legacy of survival. You prepare small packets, hand-label them, deliver them to nearby villages.
Not as a business, as a gesture.
A bridge between centuries. One day a child runs up to you and hands you a note, scrawled on the back of a rice receipt. My grandfather says thank you. Your tea made him feel less alone. You press the paper to your chest. You never imagined leaves could do that.
But they can. And they did.
Kisho begins waking you earlier now. Not monk early. Thankfully, he hasn't gone full chant at dawn on you, but early enough that the sky is still rinsed in lavender and the dew hasn't yet decided what to do with itself. You trudge to the tea field with a linen sack and hands that haven't quite remembered how to move. He hands you a worn rake and says, "It's your turn to guide the fog." You assume it's a metaphor. It is not. Apparently part of the monastery's success with tea lies in microclimate's tiny pockets of mist, shade and wind. The plants that grew best were those tended at just the right moment in just the right light. Sometimes monks would literally rake smoke into certain corners of the field or plant windbreaks to guide fog. It sounds ridiculous until you see the difference. The leaves kissed by morning mist are more vivid, more tender. A richer green, like someone whispered secrets to them overnight. And suddenly the phrase guiding the fog feels like poetry you didn't earn. That's your mainstream historical fact, by the way. In Japan's elite tea-growing regions, controlling light and humidity via canopy, shading, smoke screens or strategic planting was an art form. This wasn't farming, it was choreography. As you rake the edges of a low fire to channel smoke gently over the furthest plot, you can't help but grin. You're not just working, you're coaxing, suggesting, giving the leaves just enough drama to make them interesting. Later that day, Keisho shows you how to shade leaves using traditional woven mats laid over bamboo frames to simulate cloud cover. Too much sun, he explains, makes them loud. We want them whispering. You whisper to the leaves, they do not respond, but you swear they shimmer. One of the other monks, Masaru, quiet eyes, always watching, offers a story while you work. Long ago, he says, a monk planted tea for the emperor, but every harvest was bitter. He meditated, fasted. Nothing changed, until he realized he'd planted on the wrong slope. Not because of soil, because it faced the wrong memory. You pause. What does that mean? Masaru shrugs. Ask the mountain. Quirky tidbit time. Some Zen monks believe tea absorbed the mood of its cultivator. Harvest with resentment brew bitterness. Pick with joy, steep calm. It's not proven, of course, but enough monks believed it, that tea harvests were once preceded by silent retreat. And you, in your beginner's awkwardness, try your best. You stop humming pop songs under your breath. You try harvesting with intention. You even apologize to a leaf you stepped on. Small moments start to matter. You notice how certain bugs only show up after rain, how a breeze from the east means dry tea, how one corner of the field always smells faintly like yuzu blossom, even when none are blooming. You start talking to the field, not loudly, but in that half-thought way you might talk to a cat. You greet it in the morning. You thank it after plucking. You apologize when you tug too hard. One afternoon, you find an old tea stone buried in the soil, a hand-sized smooth black disc used long ago to weigh down leaves during fermentation. You bring it to Keisho. He turns it over in his palm and says, "This belonged to Genryo." You wait. He was a monk here, kind, terrible at raking, but his tea always sold first. Maybe he whispered better. The stone is passed to you. It now lives in your robe pocket. You rub it when nervous, or when Keisho gives you that look that says, "Don't mess this batch up." You become part of the cycle of picking, shading, drying, blending, of mistakes, of discoveries, of laughter that turns into coughing when someone burns the roast. Historians still argue whether the aesthetic elevation of tea in Zen monasteries was a spiritual movement or a marketing one. Did monks truly believe in the enlightenment properties of tea, or was it just good branding for a product that happened to save them from bankruptcy? You sit with that thought and realize the answer might be yes to both. Because what you're doing, balancing flavors, choosing timing, caring for something fragile, isn't just economy, it's empathy. It's a form of mindfulness that involves dirt under your nails and steam on your face. The tea field becomes your classroom. One evening, Keisho invites you to prepare a batch solo. You panic, you fumble, you oversteep the leaves, you under-roast the stems, and then something shifts. You let go of the rules, you listen, and your hand, miraculously, absurdly, starts to move like it remembers something older than you. The result? Not perfect, but good.
Really good.
Keisho nods once, whispering. You feel ridiculous and proud at the same time. That night, you drink your own blend by the stone lantern. The wind rustles the leaves. Somewhere, the bell chimes the hour. And you sip. It tastes like spring, like moss after rain, like a memory you can't name but don't want to forget. The next morning begins with a question. Keisho leans into the quiet steam of his tea bowl and asks, "What's the difference between tea and water?" You assume it's a riddle. It usually is. You fumble through a few guesses, taste color, caffeine, but he only smiles and says, "Memory." The tea holds memory. Of the slope it grew on the hands that plucked it, the silence that surrounded it. Water passes. Tea lingers. And today you're going to learn the most delicate part of tea making, the roasting. Inside a low stone room warmed by a sunken hearth, you sit cross-legged while Keisho spreads pale green leaves onto a wide iron pan. A soft fire glows below, not roaring, but patient. He stirs the leaves with bare hands, yes, bare hands, never flinching. You watch as the leaves twist, deepen in color, and release their scent. It's sharp at first, then sweet, like rain hitting slate, or bread toasting somewhere far away. Then it's your turn. Your fingers burn, you hiss under your breath. Kisho grunts once in what you assume is monk speak for "you'll live." This method, he explains, is called kamairi, pan roasting by hand, no machines, no shortcuts. The technique's barely used anymore outside of niche mountain regions, but the monastery has preserved it like a sacred relic. And here comes the historical fact. Kamairi processing dates back to early Japanese tea traditions that diverged from the Chinese steamed style. It results in a different aroma texture and curl, something more artisanal, more intimate. Your first batch is crispy. Kisho flicks a single leaf onto your knee. It snaps in half. Overdone, he says. Try again. You do. Over and over, until your palms tingle and your spine learns to fold without complaint. Eventually the leaves start to curl like fiddlehead ferns. They whisper against each other in the pan. You breathe in and it smells like moss firewood and the smallest bit of citrus. In the corner, Masaru is painting labels for the tea tins. He works with ink made from soot and pine resin, dipping his brush in slow, deliberate strokes. The characters are old, elegant, pre-modern. Each label names not just the tea, but the mood it hopes to evoke. One tin reads, "Drifting fog at Temple Gate." Another, "Remembrance of First Frost." You ask how long he's been doing this. 15 years, he replies, "Still working on my favorite." You ask what that is. He shrugs, something like, "Hope in hot water?" But better. Quirky fact time. In some historic tea traditions, especially among Zen practitioners, naming a tea was considered as vital as blending it. A good name wasn't marketing, it was intention, almost prayer. Your next roasted batch earns a silent nod from Kisho. He hands you a tin, your tin. It's blank.
You'll know the name when you drink it, he says.
The next step is blending.
No, not dumping random leaves into a bowl like you're making trail mix. This is more like calligraphy with taste.
Kisho teaches you the art of layering some stems for sweetness, older leaves for depth, tender tips for fragrance. It's not about mixing flavors, it's about composing a feeling. He lets you choose your first blend theme. You go with the moment before it rains. Not bad. You pick leaves that smell faintly of stone and cloud. One twig that looks like it belonged to a monk in a past life. A sprig that somehow captures the sound of a bell echoing. The result strange, soft, bittersweet. Not rain, Kisho says, sipping, but definitely overcast. He approves. By now your days fall into rhythm. Wake, walk, rake, pick, roast, blend, label, steep, repeat. Evening comes with laughter. Masaru once burned an entire batch because he was staring at a moth. Another monk confesses he's been sneaking in citrus peels just for fun. There's tea everywhere in your sleeves, your dreams, your socks. And with every cup you understand a little more. Not just how to make tea, but how to feel it. Historians still argue whether Japanese tea culture flourished as a spiritual act or as a way to give purpose to a struggling monastic economy. One scroll praises its meditative power, another outlines tax benefits from tea exports. The truth you suspect is that both are true. Tea can be sacred and strategic, personal and profitable. And in this monastery centuries ago, those threads wove together to rescue something sacred from the edge of collapse. Because here's the turning point: with their unique flavor, patience-driven process, and monk-blended charm, the tea began to sell. Slowly at first. A few merchants, then nobles, then word of mouth. By the time you arrive in the narrative, it's already legend. You, the outsider, the rake fumbler, are part of that living story now.
And your next batch?
Tastes like rustling trees and the promise of snow. You smile, because maybe tea really is memory in liquid form. The clouds are heavier tonight. You can smell rain threading its way through the cedar branches above, hear it brushing softly against the paper windows of your sleeping room. But you're not asleep yet. You're perched beside a low table, a bowl of your latest blend steaming quietly in your hands. It smells like toasted bark and something warm you can't name. Across from you, Masaru yawns and reaches for his own cup. Kisho is snoring in the corner like a small thunderstorm wrapped in a brown robe. The conversation drifts toward markets. "Have you ever been to Uji?" Masaru asks, rubbing his thumb across the side of his bowl. You shake your head.
"Ah," he says, "that's where the tea world gets loud."
And just like that, the story opens again. Uji, south of Kyoto, a town built on hills, mist and matcha. By the 14th century, it had become the center of Japan's most prized tea cultivation, thanks in large part to soil that seemed blessed by the gods and a climate that whispered to leaves like a lullaby. Monasteries like the one you're in saw opportunity. Not just spiritual, but practical. Some sent emissaries to Uji to learn the latest techniques. Others experimented with crossbreeding varietals or shading their bushes longer to intensify the flavor. The stakes: staying solvent, staying relevant, staying open. You sip again. This blend is mellow, almost bashful. And here's the historical fact. The Japanese imperial court began to sponsor certain temples not just for religious reasons, but because of their tea. One temple's roasted blend was said to soothe the shogun's migraines. Another was rumored to taste different during eclipses. Whether true or not, the mystique sold well. But none of this was guaranteed. Tea had to keep impressing. So monks leaned into storytelling. They didn't just sell leaves, they sold legends. One tin carried a scroll fragment supposedly blessed by a poet. Another was wrapped in fabric from an old robe once worn by a master who hadn't spoken in 30 years. You ask Masaru if any of that was true. He shrugs. Some, he says, some we made better. Quirky detail time. One monastery recorded its harvest notes, not by date, but by moon phase and mood. An entry reads bitter green, new moon, headache, better tomorrow. Apparently tea blending and astrology weren't always separate hobbies. You pour yourself another cup. It tastes different now, less like plants, more like pages in an old book. You ask Masaru what saved the monastery really. He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he rises, retrieves a dusty wooden box and sets it between you. Inside are letters, dozens of them. Faded paper, brush-stroked characters, tiny wax seals, long broken. They wrote to us, he says.
Who? Everyone. Farmers, merchants, even a daimyo once, asking for more tea, praising a blend, thanking us for helping their sleep, their digestion, their heartbreak.
He runs a finger along one edge of the box. They paid in silver, in rice. One woman sent a chicken. Your mind wanders to the accounts room you passed earlier, a humble space with scrolls and wooden abacuses. Someone in that room made sense of barter deals involving fowl prayer beads and rice sacks.
That's when you realize something important.
The monks weren't selling tea. They were selling care, craft, intimacy brewed leaf by leaf. And that across politics, war, famine, and the decay of patronage is what kept them alive. Historians still debate whether monasteries in feudal Japan functioned more like religious institutions or rural corporations. Some see them as holy sanctuaries, others see them as savvy hubs of production and trade. But you're sitting here with a monk who smells like pine smoke and plum vinegar, holding a letter from a woman who once sent a chicken in exchange for a blend called Winter's Softest Footstep. You lean back and smile. The rain has started, and tomorrow the market caravan arrives. Kisho wakes with a grunt, eyes you and says, "You ready to sell what you made?" Your stomach flips. Sell to people outside. You ask him what to say. He smirks. Nothing. Let them sip. Tea does the talking. He rolls over and goes back to snoring. Masaru chuckles. "Welcome to the family business," he says. And just like that, the stakes rise again. Tomorrow isn't just about brewing, it's about surviving. Because once not too long ago, this monastery nearly faded from the mountainside, forgotten, empty, ghosted by time. And now it's sending tea out into the world like handwritten letters sealed in steam. You close the wooden box, tuck it back where it belongs. The rain sharpens for a moment, then softens again, and you realize you know what to name your blend.
Not today. Not yet.
But soon. The rooster doesn't crow so much as wheeze. You blink awake to grey light and the lingering scent of roasted rice and damp roof tiles. A bamboo curtain flutters in the morning wind. Below the hill, the path to town waits, rutted, muddy, lined with moss and ambition. You're dressed before you realize it. Robes, cinched sleeves, rolled tiny satchel of your blend, tucked close like a pocketful of secrets. Masaru hands you a rice ball, still warm. Kisho waves half-heartedly, already buried in another pot of experimentation. The monastery gate creaks open. Today you go to market. The trail to town is quiet except for birds arguing somewhere overhead. Your sandals squish occasionally. Not dramatic, just an honest squish. You pass a cedar stump carved with a face, possibly a warning, possibly a joke. Either way, you nod respectfully. At the edge of the village, stalls bloom like mushrooms. Woven mats, stringed instruments, glazed pots, dried fish staring blankly at the sunrise, and there tucked between a tofu vendor and a boy selling arrow fletchings is your space. A blanket, a pot, a stack of tiny clay cups no bigger than thimbles. Masaru sets the kettle. Steam unfurls like a signal. You sit.
And wait.
Your first customer is an old woman who doesn't speak, just points. You pour. She sips. She nods. She pays in coins smoothed by time. Your second is a boy with ink on his fingers. He tastes, grimaces slightly, then whispers, "Too grassy?" You nod. That's fair. Your third customer is a samurai, not armored, but unmistakable. He asks nothing, drinks twice, leaves a polished stone. You're not sure if that counts as payment or a threat. Here's a mainstream historical fact. During the Muromachi period, 1336-1573, markets near temple towns flourished. These weren't just economic centers, they were cultural crossroads. Monks, nobles, farmers, ronin actors, everyone collided under awnings and silk banners, trading goods, gossip, and ideas. In these spaces, temples didn't just sell tea, they became tastemakers. Some even hosted impromptu tea competitions, a blind tasting of different blends. Guess the origin, guess the elevation, guess the monk. Bragging rights lasted weeks. You try not to overthink your customers. You're not selling to win contests. You're selling to stay alive. Quirky tidbit time. One monastery's tea stall had a squirrel trained to bow whenever someone bought a tin. Another hired a retired sumo wrestler to recite poetry about steam. You don't have either of those, just clay cups and a sincere blend. Midday arrives like a wet sock. The clouds are stubborn. The wind picks up. One corner of your stall flaps into your face mid-sail. But slowly something strange happens. People come back. The silent woman from earlier, she brings her sister. The boy with the ink returns with bread and advice, less steep time. You take notes. You adjust. You begin to recognize that look, someone who's curious but pretending not to be. You've worn it yourself. You offer samples before they ask. You answer questions no one voices aloud.
And sometimes when someone sips and just sighs, that's enough.
The rhythm settles. Pour, smile, steam, listen, repeat. Masaru handles the coins with his usual nonchalance. You swear you see him pocket a painted rock someone left as payment. There's an open scholarly debate over how central tea commerce became to temples. Some argue it was peripheral supplemental income, a side hustle for monks who didn't like praying. Others insist it became the economic backbone for certain monasteries, especially those farther from courtly support. Your back says it matters. Your knees say, next time bring a cushion.
Late afternoon, the air changes.
Your final customer is unexpected.
A monk from another temple.
He studies your blend like it's a scroll, sniffs, sips, frowns, sips again, smiles. Then, without a word, he pulls a scroll from his robe and hands it to Masaru.
A trade.
You glance at it later. It's a recipe one you've never seen. Notes in the margins, a symbol from a rival sect drawn upside down. You wonder if it's a gift, a challenge, a test. Masaru tucks it away with reverence.
And you pack up.
The stall folds into a bundle. The coins jingle softly like wind chimes in your palm. And as you walk home through the hush of pine needles and memory, you realize something crucial. You're not just helping save the monastery. You're making it new.
This isn't about debt.
It's about voice. And the next blend, you already taste it in your head. Little roasted rice, a dried plum note, maybe a hint of pine. You'll call it market day recovery, or maybe something more poetic like whispers after rain. Either way, tomorrow's kettle waits. Steam is memory, tea is story,
And
you're part of both now. You don't wake up to bells anymore. You wake up to questions. What if we infused it longer? What if we roasted the stems? What if we used spring water from the west slope? What if we stopped putting everything in a plain clay pot and carved a tiny poem into the side? The monastery is changing, and not quietly. There's steam in every room, scribbles on every scroll, and debate in every hallway. You step into the kitchen and someone's already boiling something experimental in a bamboo tube. A novice chants softly over it, just in case spiritual blessing counts as an ingredient. And every blend, successful or not, gets logged. This is your life now, part alchemist, part archivist, part caffeine addict. You're not alone. Keisho has become more animated than you've ever seen him. His usual mutterings have transformed into full-blown lectures on the emotional impact of bitterness. Masaru is testing different serving vessels, insisting that how the tea is poured affects perceived generosity. You're pretty sure he's just having fun, but you indulge him.
every evening there's a tasting.
3 candles, 5 cups, a dozen opinions, all whispered like sacred scripture. You sip, you sigh, you debate whether that aftertaste is stone fruit or regret. A mainstream historical fact for you. By the late 15th century, tea had become central not just to temples, but to the aesthetics of Japanese culture. This was the age when the tea ceremony, or chanoyu, began taking shape, part ritual, part philosophy, part deeply meditative practice. But your monastery hasn't reached ritual yet. You're still in the chaos phase. One novice accidentally combines roasted buckwheat with salted plum and calls it bravery. It is not, but the name is excellent. A senior monk tries powdered tea like the Chinese. The room fills with green dust. You all cough for 20 minutes, then agree it was technically informative. There's a strange beauty in this mess, the blend of purpose and curiosity, the sense that every cup might be better than the last, or worse, but better in its failure. Quirky tidbit. There's an obscure diary entry from a 16th century abbot who described his tea-making team as a herd of kettle spirits chasing the perfect ghost. You finally understand what that means, and despite the chaos, something else is happening. Word gets out. Pilgrims come not just for prayers, but for the tea. Merchants stop by to pay respects, but leave with 2 tins and a request for something suitable for long sea voyages. A daimyo's retainer visits and politely refuses everything until Keisho offers a smoked barley blend that makes the man weep. This isn't just a monastery anymore. It's a laboratory,
A sanctuary.
a brand. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. There's a brief debate over whether this kind of attention cheapens your tradition. The head monk calls for a special council. You all gather in the moonlight, sipping a mint sesame infusion that no one particularly likes. He clears his throat, looks at you.
And says, when was the last time we had so much laughter in the courtyard? Everyone relaxes.
Somewhere a kettle hisses in agreement. Here's where the scholarly debate slides in. Historians still argue whether these monastic tea ventures were intentional enterprises or desperate improvisations. Was tea cultivation always destined to be spiritual commerce, or was it a lucky accident that monks turned poverty into innovation? Either way, you know what you feel. The blend that saved the monastery didn't just balance debt sheets. It restored rhythm, flow, a reason to wake up before dawn and argue over leaves like they matter more than rain. And the leaves do matter. Because every cup you pour isn't just nourishment, it's narrative. You start assigning names to each blend, not flashy but meaningful. Silence before rain, pine slope dream, memory of citrus, lantern at dusk. Masaru insists on aggressively toasted resolve. You veto it. You carve tiny symbols on the tins now. Not for branding, though, let's be honest. It's great branding, but to anchor memory. Each blend has a moment, a season, a face. And now when you go to market, people ask for them by name. Do you have the one with barley and pine needles? My aunt wants the smoky one with the haiku on the lid. I'm here for the blend that tastes like late spring. You smile, you pour, you listen. And at night, when the monastery goes quiet, You sit under the oldest tree with a chipped cup and a tired body.
And you sip,
Not to taste,
not to judge.
just to be. Because somewhere between bitterness and bloom you found peace. And you're going to keep pouring. Tonight, the moon is brighter than usual. It floats just above the ridge of the tiled temple roof, catching the steam from your kettle like it's backlighting a ghost. You sit alone, cross-legged, cradling a cup of something floral and strange hibiscus. No one remembers adding hibiscus. But it works. You close your eyes. The silence is deep like the stillness after snowfall. Only the occasional flick of a mothwing or the distant hoot of an owl breaks the air.
And then the footsteps, soft ones, deliberate.
A visitor cloaked in travelling robes appears at the edge of the courtyard. He bows, asks for water, then pauses. I heard he says slowly that your tea can change a person's fortune. You smile partly because it's absurd, partly because, well, it's been happening more than you'd like to admit. You motion him to sit. He does. You pour. The blend. Something new. Roasted twig citrus peel, a whisper of lavender, steeped just shy of boiling. He sips. His face changes only slightly. A pause, then this tastes like forgiveness. You don't know what he means. You don't ask, but he drinks every drop. Mainstream historical fact. By the 16th century, Japanese monks weren't just cultivating tea, they were defining its philosophy. Sen no Rikyu, a tea master of profound influence, formalized wabi-cha, a stripped-down rustic tea ceremony that valued imperfection, simplicity, and the sacredness of the mundane. But Sen no Rikyu doesn't exist in your world yet. You're still laying the groundwork, carving it from clay and repetition and trial and error. And lately, the errors have been fewer. The monks now divide responsibilities. Some tend to the leaves, others to the packaging. A few write short poems to tuck into each shipment little surprise blessings to whoever opens the crate. Keisho takes to calling them leaf sutras. You don't argue. Each morning you receive letters. Some are business, 10 tins for the spring festival. Others are emotional. My mother cried when she tasted first thaw. One note simply says, "This tea saved my marriage." You pin that one to the wall. Quirky tidbit for you. There's an obscure Zen parable about a master who, when asked what enlightenment feels like, replied, "Like tasting tea you didn't brew yet, knowing every step of the process." No one's ever agreed on what that means, but it feels strangely relevant tonight, because something is shifting.
Not just in the monastery, but in you.
Remember when you used to dread the weight of silence? Now you crave it. When a blend fails, you don't feel shame, you feel curiosity. And when it succeeds, you no longer rush to replicate it. You let it be.
Let it rest.
Let it echo. Historians still argue whether these monasteries were driven by economic genius or spiritual discipline. Some believe the success of temple-grown tea was a side effect of sheer necessity, what we might call bootstrapped enlightenment. Others insist it was planned all along, that the monks understood tea's potential before the first kettle ever boiled. But you don't care. Not tonight. You're too busy watching the stars, too busy realizing that every cup you've poured, every note of cardamom, every splash of iron-rich water has added to a story bigger than your name, your temple, your century. The visitor finishes his cup bows again and disappears down the path, humming a tune you almost remember from childhood. You don't follow. You don't need to.
'Cause tomorrow someone else will come.
And when they do, you'll be ready with water at the right temperature, leaves balanced just so, and maybe a tin labelled hushed apology in late autumn. A blend made last week by a sleepy novice who claimed it was inspired by the way the wind knocked over his lantern. It's perfect, because your tea doesn't chase perfection. It embraces story.
And so does this place.
You glance up at the full moon again. It reflects in the surface of your cup, shimmering like a silver coin dropped into a wishing bowl. You drink it down, not for answers, but for rhythm, balance, warmth. Because once upon a time, this monastery almost vanished into silence. But tea taught it to sing again. The kettle sings one last time tonight, low and steady. Not urgent, never urgent, but persistent. Like it knows you need one final cup before this chapter ends. You lift the lid and watch the steam curl out in shapes you stopped trying to interpret long ago. Spirits, memories, just air and heat. All possibilities seem reasonable now. Tonight's blend is simple green buds and roasted rice, humble, satisfying. It tastes like early morning errands and temple wood warmed by sun. You pour with practiced ease, but even now, after all this time, you still whisper a thank you to the leaves. Not because it's required, but because it feels right. The temple is different these days. Not louder, still quiet, but it hums differently. Like the sound of things thriving. The novice dorms are full again. Some come seeking solitude. Others seek recipes. You no longer ask which. You just show them where the good kettles are kept. Keisho is teaching a class now on infusion ratios. He calls it Zen and the Art of Hydration. The name makes you wince every time, but his students adore him. The abbot too seems content. He walks the halls with a half smile, and his sleeves rolled up, sometimes offering to help stir roasted barley or reweigh dry stock. He says nothing about the day you nearly abandoned the place, but he does occasionally leave fresh ginger by your door. A monk's way of saying, I see you. Your tea is being served in Kyoto now, in noble houses, even in the shogun's estate if rumors are to be believed. But no one in this monastery brags. They don't need to, because the true reward isn't prestige. It's continuity. The knowledge that one warm pot can quiet a restless spirit, that one well-balanced blend can carry a weary guest further than gold. And sure, historians still argue whether these temple blends were the origin of matcha culture or if they simply coexisted with it in pockets and corners. Some insist the flavor profiles were deliberately developed to match Buddhist ritual. Others claim they were happy accidents brewed by necessity. But those arguments don't matter here. Not under these rafters, not beneath these stars. You pass by the blending room, still lit, still humming. A young monk inside is experimenting with dried ume blossoms and orange peel. You don't interrupt. You just listen to the mortar grinding, and then you move on. Down the hallway, past the old ledger wall now covered in scrap haikus and pressed leaves, you push open the back door and step out into the garden. The air is cool, clean. It carries a scent of wet stone and last year's lavender. You breathe deep, and for a second, only a second, you feel it again, the almost vanished dread. The memory of debt, of collapse of a sacred place, slipping into ruin. But the feeling fades, quickly washed away by tea steam and sandalwood. The fear is a shadow now, and your shadow is just one of many walking this mountain. You light a candle, place it near the little altar by the garden gate. Not to pray exactly, but to remember, to mark how far things have come, from desperation to devotion, from silence to scent, and yes, from bankruptcy to balance. One quirky historical note to end on: there's an old superstition among tea farmers in Uji that if the first boil of the year is quiet, the harvest will be bountiful. No hissing, no roaring, just a gentle exhale. Tonight your kettle did just that, and as your final cup cools in your hand, you understand that this story, your story, isn't one of tea alone. It's about care, about timing, about attention so precise it becomes love, a kind of silent art, a kind of salvation. You lean back. The garden stretches quietly around you, every leaf outlined in moonlight. The candle flickers. The crickets pick up a slow rhythmic pulse like a lullaby in a language only the trees remember. You don't need to do anything.
Not now.
Not tonight. Let the steam rise, let the air cool, let the night be nothing more than what it is. You let your body soften like leaves unfurling in warm water. Your thoughts float, no pressure to steep or settle, just drift. Somewhere in the distance, water drips from a bamboo pipe. A perfect, gentle note. Then another. Then silence. The story is over. The kettle is empty. The temple is whole.
And you
are more than okay. You are still here.
still steeping, still warm.
Still awake, maybe, but only barely. And as the moon folds itself deeper behind the hills and the last of the candle curls into smoke, you close your eyes.
Not to end things,
but to carry them forward into dreams, into breath, into morning. Because like the best blends rest isn't about stopping, it's about release. So let go now. Let the silence hold you.
Let the tea do its work.
Let sleep find you like an old friend carrying a blanket stitched from steam and quiet victories. Good night.